Imagine a place where summer temperatures climb to 50 degrees. The ground cracks from the heat, and water becomes more valuable than any other resource. Farmers carefully measure every litre for irrigation. Livestock get watered in short bursts, and in small towns, running water from a tap is a rare thing, because the supply runs out fast. For parts of remote Australia, this is already everyday life. Prolonged droughts and brief, infrequent rains turn vast stretches of land into a lifeless wasteland. That is exactly why, for many years now, the debate has not quieted down about the need for a fundamentally new source of water, one independent of the season and independent of rainfall. But how do you find it? Where do you get fresh water in the middle of the desert? Stay with us, because there is a lot more to come. Australia is the driest inhabited continent on Earth. About 70% of its landmass falls within arid and semi-arid zones. Rainfall there is scarce. Rivers shrink or dry up completely during summer, and underground water reserves are depleted far faster than they can be replenished. South Australia knows drought firsthand. The Murray River, the main waterway of the region, has dropped so low several times over the past 20 years that salt water from the sea began pushing into its mouth. This poses a direct threat to crops, livestock, and urban water supply systems. The core of the problem is not a total absence of rain. Rain does fall, but it is extremely uneven. Some seasons dump so much water that flooding breaks out. Then, a year or two passes with almost no precipitation at all. That kind of unpredictability turns out to be worse than a steady drought, because there is no way to properly prepare for it or plan around it in advance. The northern parts of South Australia are especially vulnerable. Mining operations are located there, farmers work the land, and people live in small towns. All of them need water, and all of them are competing for this limited resource. Mines consume water in staggering quantities. Farmers are barely keeping up with the shortfall for irrigation. Residents of the towns simply want to be able to quench their thirst. The first idea that naturally comes to mind is filling the inland lakes. Australia has Lake Eyre, one of the largest in the country. At first glance, it looks like a ready-made reservoir, right there for the taking. But the problem is that Lake Eyre sits below sea level, it is salty, and for most of the year, it is almost completely dry. When water does make it there, it evaporates at a rapid pace. Evaporation is the main enemy of open bodies of water in an arid climate. In hot, dry air, a lake covering several square kilometres loses more water in a year than an entire city uses in several months. Building large, open reservoirs in the middle of a desert is an expensive way to simply cook off the resource, along with the money invested in it. The second obvious answer is groundwater. Australia has the Great Artesian Basin, an enormous underground water deposit lying beneath several states. It has been in use since the 19th century, and for many years it seemed like the supply there was practically inexhaustible. However, the basin replenishes itself extremely slowly. The water accumulated there over thousands of years, and heavy extraction only began a few decades ago. In some areas, pressure in the wells has already dropped noticeably. On top of that, the water there is often salty, or loaded with minerals at concentrations that make it unfit for drinking or for irrigating fields. Groundwater comes with another serious problem. It sustains unique ecosystems. Some artesian springs are home to species of fish and invertebrates found nowhere else on the planet. If the pressure drops and a spring dries up, those creatures disappear forever. So simply pumping water without any regard for the consequences is not an option. Against this backdrop, the Northern Water Project took shape. Its idea is straightforward. Build a desalination plant on the coast, then run a pipeline north to the mining districts and towns of Australia. The distance from the coast to the far end is around 350 kilometres. Treating seawater works on the principle of reverse osmosis. This is not complex chemistry or some technological miracle. Water is forced at high pressure through membranes with very fine pores. Salt and contaminants stay on one side, and clean water moves through to the other. This method is used today in many different parts of the world. Australia already has hands-on experience with plants like this. Perth operates a large desalination facility that supplies water to a significant portion of the city. Similar installations are up and running in Melbourne and Sydney. The technology has already been proven in practice. The question is not whether it works, but how much it costs and who benefits. One particular feature of this kind of treatment is that the resulting water ends up too pure. It lacks the minerals the human body needs. So before it enters the pipes, it has to be remineralized, meaning calcium, magnesium, and other elements have to be added back in. That is an extra step, extra equipment, and extra cost. Now, about the pipeline. Running a pipeline several hundred kilometres through the Australian desert is not ordinary construction. It is a full-on expedition. The roads out there are unpaved, the equipment overheats, workers have to be brought in from a long distance and provided with shelter, food and communications right there in field conditions. Summer air temperatures in those parts reach 50 degrees. Metal structures expand and warp. Laying pipe requires careful accounting for temperature swings. Otherwise, within a few years, cracks will appear at the joints. These are not theoretical concerns. They are real lessons learned during the construction of previous pipelines in Australia. Maintaining the pipeline after it is built is another large-scale challenge. Every few dozen kilometres, pumping stations are required because water does not flow uphill on its own. Electricity is needed to power the pumps. Personnel are needed to monitor the condition of the equipment and address breakdowns in a timely manner. All of this demands ongoing financial investment, not just the one-time outlay at construction. Supplying electricity to the treatment plants and the pumping stations is one of the weightiest cost items. Reverse osmosis requires high pressure, which means significant energy consumption. If that energy comes from coal or gas power plants, the environmental footprint of the entire project ends up being quite substantial. That is exactly why discussions around connecting solar panels and wind turbines are becoming more and more active in projects like this. South Australia already holds a leading position in the country in terms of its share of renewable energy. If the plant runs on solar and wind power, the impact on the environment will be significantly reduced. But building that kind of infrastructure also requires serious capital investment. Now, about the money. Initial cost estimates for the Northern Water project come in at around 2 billion Australian dollars. That is a staggering sum. Pulling it from the budget of a single state is not realistic. Either federal funding is needed, or private investors need to be brought in, or some combination of both. Mining companies in the region are willing to pay for water, since without it their operations would simply grind to a halt. However, they are demanding long-term contracts with a fixed price. The government, for its part, wants to preserve flexibility. This is a familiar clash of interests that has been dragging negotiations out for years. There is another risk that specialists refer to as a pipeline with no buyers. If all the infrastructure gets built, and then a major mine shuts down, or production stops because of a drop in global metal prices, the pipeline ends up underutilised. The costs of maintaining it do not go away. That is a serious financial risk, especially for the government. The issue of brine deserves its own attention. With reverse osmosis, roughly half of the seawater volume ends up as waste in the form of a highly concentrated saltwater solution. That has to go somewhere. Typically, it is returned to the ocean, but if this is done improperly, marine life in the discharge zone begins to die off. Research conducted near plants of this type in various countries has shown that with proper brine dispersal, the damage to the ecosystem is minimal. However, that requires correctly designed discharge pipes and continuous monitoring of conditions. If corners are cut on that, the consequences for the coastal environment can be quite noticeable. Indigenous Australians who have lived on these lands since time immemorial are also part of this process. Part of the pipeline route passes through territories that hold deep cultural and spiritual significance for Aboriginal communities. Any construction in such places requires careful consultation, and negotiations move slowly. Some communities see certain opportunities in the project. If working infrastructure appears nearby, jobs and maintenance contracts will come with it. Other communities worry that construction will disturb places that should not be disturbed. Finding the balance between these positions is not easy, and the process takes time. Environmentalists broadly support the idea of reducing pressure on rivers and underground aquifers, but they are pushing for strict oversight of potential consequences. Their concern is not the technology itself, but its scale. When a plant is large and running around the clock, even minor regulatory violations accumulate over time and eventually make themselves known. Alongside the large pipeline, other approaches are being developed in the region as well. Reuse of treated wastewater has already become a reality in several Australian cities. That water is used for irrigation, industrial purposes, and even for replenishing underground reserves. It is cheaper than desalinated seawater and gentler on the environment. Smart water supply networks are another promising direction. Sensors on pipes and meters make it possible to track leaks in real time. In aging urban systems, up to 20% of water is lost without a trace through damaged pipes right underground. This is not the exception, it is the normal situation in many cities around the world. For the most remote communities, where no pipeline will ever reach, localized solutions are being developed. One of them is pulling water directly from the air. Specialized units capture and condense atmospheric moisture, storing it as a reserve. In the desert, this is not a primary water source, but as a backup option for a small community, it is a perfectly workable one. Rainwater collection into large storage tanks is also being considered. In areas where rain is rare but does occasionally fall, a single downpour can supply a week's worth of water. This does not require complex equipment. The main drawback is unreliability. If there is no rain for several months, the tank sits empty. Combining several sources is exactly where specialists are landing. Not one big plant, but a set of solutions. Seawater desalination for industry, reclaimed water for irrigation, localized solutions for hard-to-reach points. A system like that is more resilient because if one link fails, the rest keep working. The Northern Water Project is moving along slowly. Research has been underway since the late 2000s. Negotiations with communities, environmental assessments, consultations with business, all of it takes many years. By the mid-2020s, no final decision on starting construction had been made. This is the typical fate of large-scale water projects. Global practice offers examples of a more decisive approach. In Israel, marine desalination became the country's primary source of drinking water through several decades of focused effort. In Saudi Arabia and the UAE, plants like these have been operating for a long time and supply water to the majority of the population. But those countries built and invested consistently, without lengthy pauses. Australia is taking a different path. It has a well-developed system of local government and independent states with different interests. Every few years, a new government comes to power with somewhat different priorities. In a system like that, long-term infrastructure projects move at a deliberate pace. Dealt an extremely harsh blow to the southeastern part of the country. Rivers ran low, reservoirs emptied out, and several cities imposed restrictions on water use. Farmers take direct financial hits during dry spells. There is nothing to water the livestock with, crops die. Some operations in the northern regions simply do not survive the dry years. Owners either go into debt or are forced to sell the land. These are not lines in a report. They are the real lives of actual families and entire generations. The mining sector handles droughts more easily since it has greater financial resources and can afford to pay high prices for water. But that increases pressure on the shared supply. When mines compete with farmers for access to groundwater, farmers often lose. That breeds tension between local communities and big business. The government tries to manage the situation through a system of water rights. Each user receives a permitted extraction volume, but in dry years the limits are cut and then a real fight begins. Large companies hire lawyers and defend their positions. A small farmer does not have those kinds of resources. Water rights are one of the reasons the debate over the big pipeline has dragged on so long. If a new water source comes online, the rights to it will have to be divided up all over again. Who gets access first? Who pays more? These questions are not resolved by passing a simple law. They are resolved through lengthy political negotiations. There is one more aspect that rarely gets talked about. A seawater desalination plant requires continuous maintenance of its membranes. Membranes wear out and need to be replaced every few years. The chemicals used for flushing have to be regularly brought in. The whole supply chain creates a dependency on uninterrupted deliveries and on fluctuations in global material prices. If there are supply disruptions or a sharp spike in prices, the cost of water from such a plant can go up noticeably. In regions where water is already expensive, that creates a serious additional burden. That is exactly why specialists insist that seawater desalination must supplement other sources, not replace them entirely. Meanwhile, research and preparatory work continue. Engineers are studying soil conditions along the future pipeline route, analysing geological data, and calculating the optimal placement of pumping stations. It is painstaking work that does not make newspaper headlines, but without it, the project will never get off the ground. On a global scale, interest in projects like this is steadily growing. Water is becoming a strategic resource. Countries that have mastered desalination technology or water recycling through treatment are proving significantly more resilient to climate shocks. With the right approach, Australia has the potential to become a model for other arid regions of the world. Australian scientists, engineers, and politicians understand this. But understanding and acting are two different things. From the moment a construction decision is made to the point when real water comes out of the tap, years pass and several governments cycle through. This is not a criticism. It is the objective reality of large infrastructure projects in complex political systems. The Northern Water Project, if it is ever brought to life, has the potential to fundamentally change the water supply picture for South Australia. Mining regions would gain a reliable and stable resource. The pressure on rivers and groundwater would ease. For the environment, this matters enormously, since rivers would be able to gradually recover. If the project never gets built, the region will continue depending on unstable sources. In dry years, the crises, restrictions, and losses will repeat. The problem will not go away, it will only get worse. Because the climate in Australia keeps changing, and that process cannot be stopped. All of this is a story about what life costs in a place where water is critically scarce. And about the fact that no engineering solution comes easy when it involves hundreds of kilometres of pipe, years of negotiations, and billions of dollars. Leave a comment and let us know whether it is worth pouring that many resources into water at the edge of a continent, or whether there is a better way.